We've all been there. You're sitting at the kit, and no matter how hard you try, you just can't seem to play the ideas in your head and get them to go from your head to your limbs, to play them and them actually sound good. You feel like your brain isn't communicating with your feet, and your coordination is just a mess. You've been practicing independence exercises, but they're not working. You need something more, something deeper that's actually going to help you out with this once and for all. If this is you, we've got a super valuable lesson for you in store today. Employ these 3 brain tips, and you will get to where you're playing what you hear in your head, having full control and command over the kit so that you're having fun on the drums. You can do this. Hey, welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. I'm so glad you're hanging out today. I help self-taught beginner drummers know what to practice so they can nail songs and sound great with a band and become that drummer other people want to have in their band. But hey, nobody's gonna want you in your band if you don't have enough coordination to play the songs. Because if you don't have a lot of coordination, then learning songs takes forever and drumming is difficult. Everything is hard when there's not enough coordination, and everything is a struggle, everything is tedious, and you never feel comfortable and confident and in command. But when you have that 4-way limb independence, you have comfort, you have confidence, you can learn material quickly, you can improvise, you can sit in with a band and actually sound great right off the bat because you can focus on listening because your limbs are on autopilot. And that's an awesome place to be, and I want to help you get there. It feels daunting at first when you feel like you can't control your limbs and your feet feel out of control, you can't play what's in your head, and it just feels like there's a total disconnect. And even though you keep practicing and practicing, it's taking too long to get there, and so you're doubting, am I practicing the right things? What am I supposed to be doing? Is my strategy wrong? I need something new to work on here. Trust me, I've been there, and a lot of my students have been there. I had a really insightful conversation with a student in my course recently. We were going back and forth in the comment section on one of the lessons, and the student was sharing with me how they'd grown a ton through the course, and our conversation boiled down to really 3 big mental tips or mindset tips to help you develop coordination more quickly. And what's interesting, these things didn't just come up with this particular student. These things come up time and time again with many different students, everybody kind of realizing, okay, these are the 3 big things. And so this is kind of how we boiled this down. We could definitely broaden it out to here's 5 things, here's 10 things, but let's keep it simple. Let's just talk about the 3 biggest ones, the 3 biggest mental tips. Before we get into that though, kind of the theme of this, these will all make more sense if we put it within this frame of mind here. And this is kind of our big idea for today. Here it is. When you slow down, you grow faster. So when you go slower with your whole process of learning the drums, you actually end up learning them faster. Now, if that sounds like a paradox, it's because it is kind of a paradox if we're only thinking short term. But if we're thinking long term, like a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it actually makes a lot of sense. And so you've got to have that long-term vision. If you're here today because you're surfing YouTube looking for a quick tip, a quick hack, a quick new thing to practice that's going to make you the world's best drummer this week, you're in the wrong place. This is not the channel for you. I'll just be straight with you. Don't subscribe. Go find another channel that gives you all the flashy tips and tricks that might help you today, maybe. You might feel good about your playing today, but it's not going to serve you in the long term. Here at the Non-Glamorous Drummer, we're all about serving you in the long term, about mastering the instrument. You can't master the instrument this week, but you can this year, 5 years, 10 years. You'd be amazed what all you can do. So I want you to keep that in mind. When you're patient and you don't try to rush things, you actually reach your goals faster. And really, it's a quality over quantity thing, right? So let's dive into these 3 things. Real quick, though, I have a super practical gift I want to give you because I know today's very conceptual. We're talking about these conceptual tips, but I want to give you something tactical, physical, that is exercise-based that you can take to your practice room and use to really apply these concepts we're talking about today. If you're having trouble playing what's in your head, I want you to grab my 30 Days to 4-Way Rock Coordination PDF e-guide. It's totally free, no-brainer. Go grab it in the description. It'll step-by-step teach you grooves that you'll actually use in songs, gradually layering in new challenging elements of coordination, including the left foot, which is definitely challenging. By the time you get to day 10, day 12 of this, you'll really be seeing results. That's what most of my students tell me. And the point is not to get through this in 1 month. If it takes longer than that, no shame, no guilt. Everybody goes at their own pace. But this is 30 steps you can work through to gradually build coordination day by day. So be patient with it. This will give you something really physical, tactical, practical to take to your practice room and work on right now, and you can use it to really apply these concepts we're talking about today. So let this be your companion to today's lesson. All right, so do these three things or employ these three mindsets, and you will get to where you're playing what you hear in your head, having full control and command over the kit. And by the way, as we go through these, I'll be referencing several recent lessons to help you go more in depth with some of these, because obviously there's a lot to unpack here, and we could sit here for an hour talking about all these in detail. But we do have some past lessons breaking down some of these concepts even more. So if you're ready to do a deep dive, I'll be linking some additional lessons in the description. So brain tip number 1, repetition. And we mean a few different things by this, repetition and practicing. There's a great George Lawrence Stone quote at the beginning of Stick Control, classic, legendary 1930s drumming method. And we did a video on this recently, so I'm linking that one below for more info on this. But in a nutshell, George Lawrence Stone talks about the 20 times rule, practicing something 20 times. So whatever it is, the groove, pattern, whatever you're working on, playing it 20 times in a row, because at that point, if you can do it 20 times without stopping, so in other words, 20 times with no mistakes, it's feeling good, then at that point, you're ready to move to the next thing. And so what's interesting about this, the whole point is not really that 20 times is a magic number, and that number could be a little bit different for different things you're practicing. The point is to master something before moving on. Too many of us, because we live in this instant gratification culture, this hurry culture, do this, that, and we're trying to cram so many things into our lives, we don't really sit down with one thing at a time. I'm guilty of this too. We all struggle with this in some area where we're trying to do too much and we're not actually fully getting the one thing done. And so that's what I noticed talking to so many students and drummers. That's a huge issue on the drums, where they're bouncing around and they're finding this YouTube lesson on this big YouTube channel. They're finding this lesson from this drumming educator. They're finding this lesson maybe from me, and they're hopping around, but they're never fully committing to one or the other. They work on it a little bit and they're like, okay, I think I got something out of this. Okay, done, moving on, I'm bored. Or this is too hard, I'm gonna move on to something else. And because of never fully committing to something and fully mastering that thing, you don't grow. So what we mean here by this mental shift, this mindset here to employ, use repetition to fully master something before moving on to the next. Now, that doesn't mean you've only got to practice one thing at a time. Generally, what this means is you focus on a specific hand skill, while maybe you're focusing on a specific coordination skill, while maybe you're working on one specific song. Sometimes that's a simple way to put it, so that it's one thing in each of the three main categories. You're working on a coordination thing and a hand thing and a music listening ear thing. Don't try to do all the things, just pick one from each category. You've heard me talk about my 3-part practice guide. I'll link that one in the description here too, on top of the coordination one. But that's what we talk about in that guide, organizing your practice sessions so that you're being productive, so that you're going one step at a time in each of those categories. That's critical. You have to give your brain time to learn and digest, which is kind of another side to this, that not only is this mastering things, like repeating something over and over again until you master it, but also just giving your brain time to learn and digest. Make sure you're not just, let's say you're working on a new groove, and the groove is something like this. Totally random example, but maybe it's a tricky timekeeping pattern that's not totally normal, and it's a little bit syncopated down here. Well, if you only get it to the point where you're finally not messing up, you're probably not going to remember it next week, and you're going to have to learn it all over again. But if you get to the point where you've repeated it so many times that you can start morphing it and changing it and augmenting it and saying, okay, you can start improvising with it. At that point, because of that repetition, you've fully mastered this to a point where you can start to layer in new things, take away things, adjust it, improvise, be creative. And that's when you've really mastered it and you're ready to then move to something else. So just some food for thought there. Also, kind of a side note here, and this is another topic for another lesson. I made a video a while back when one of my daughters was 2.5 about 3 drumming lessons to learn from my 2.5-year-old. And it's very interesting, those of you who have had young kids or you've got young grandkids, if you look at how a little child learns something, they do it over and over again. So let's say they're trying to climb over something. They're going to do it over and over again. Doesn't matter if they roll and they fall off. They're going to try it again. If they're trying to learn a new word, they're going to say it over and over again. They're going to repeat over and over again. And that's what drives us crazy sometimes, right? Little kids will just repeat the same thing over and over again, whatever it is, because they're trying to learn it. And that's the way we are designed to learn. We're not, we're humans, we're imperfect, and we can't just learn something instantly. We have to use that repetition, and that's what you see with a little kid who's doing that by default, because that's how they were designed, how they were programmed to learn. We as adults are the same way. And so you have to work at stuff over and over again. There's a great Michael Jordan quote where he talks about, how many things he's failed at, how many games he's lost, shots he's missed. He's like, so I've had all these failures, and that is why I'm successful. It's that whole repetition, doing it and doing it and doing it. That's how you succeed. Doesn't matter how many times you fail. All right, so on to brain tip number 2, and kind of along these lines, brain tip number 2 is practicing slowly. And really this centers us onto a whole very specific coordination thing, because coordination is built at slow tempos. We recently did a bass drum speed exercise lesson a couple weeks ago that I'll link in the description. It was all about really the most powerful bass drum exercise I ever did back when I was in high school that really helped free up my right foot a bunch. And the key with this wasn't the exercise itself. It wasn't the notes and the rhythms. It was the fact that I went to a drum lesson with my teacher and he said, this is a mess, practice it more slowly. I practiced it super slow, came back the next week, and I nailed it. Why did I nail it? Because I practiced really slow. I used repetition, brain tip number 1, repetition, and I practiced really slowly. If you only practice things fast, you will never learn them. You have to go slow. You have to give your brain time to digest. Like we said a minute ago, you've got to give your brain time to digest through the repetition, but also through working at it day by day, week by week, and being patient with slow tempos, because when you practice slowly, then it can become autopilot. Because if you want to play something fast, there has to be a level of autopilot in your playing, right? Because if you want to play a really fast fill, that's something like okay, if I sit down and I play a fill like that, or something like both of those were totally random. But I can come up with something totally random like that and just play it because I've spent so much time practicing stuff slowly that I've got connections with my limbs so that they can essentially function on autopilot, where I can think of an idea and they do it. If you want your limbs to behave, if you want them connected with your brain, if you want them to work on autopilot, where you can sit here and play and do like sixteenths with the right hand and quarter notes with the bass drum, and then move the left hand around, and then even add in left foot. If you want to be able to do something like that, you have to have established this level of autopilotness with your limbs, where this and this can go on autopilot and this on autopilot, so then you're focusing on that left hand and what it's doing, coming up with creative rhythms and melodies. That autopilot level only comes from establishing the brain connections, which only comes at the slow tempos. If you're new to the drums, you just have to trust me on this. Slow tempos are where coordination is built. And how you play something, so like the quality of it, is always more important than what you're playing, which we could call the quantity. I know it's not a true apples to apples here as far as comparing cliche sayings, but how you play something and how well you play it is more important than the notes that you're playing. And so in order to develop that quality, you have to go very slow. Something interesting I want to leave you with here with this point is great feel and pocket come from good time and good dynamics, which come from smooth motion, which comes from good technique and patient strength building. I know that was a mouthful, but let's work backwards. So if we are patiently building strength with good technique, so we're working on our right foot just like we did last week, and we're making sure to grip our sticks right, and then we're patient with how long it takes to build the strength, then we're going to have a nice smooth motion in our play. And if our motion is smooth, we're going to have smooth, even dynamics. We're going to be able to control our dynamics, and our time is naturally going to be smooth. And so once that happens, great feel and pocket will happen naturally. You know, the best drummers can sit here and make a super simple money beat sound incredible. And the reason they can do that is because their time is perfect, at least near perfect. We're all human. The dynamics are super even. And so everything is just right. It's all dialed in because of that whole chain of skills that lead up to that. And so you have to have the patient strength building in the grip in order to get the motion, in order to get the dynamics, the time, the great feel, and the pocket that all the best drummers in the world have. And so it all starts with practicing slowly. Okay, brain tip number 3. This last one is probably the most difficult. I know it always has been for me, but this is one that many of my students have told me over and over again. I've heard this from so many students that this is what actually helped them get the biggest results. So, you ready for this one? Brain tip number 3, taking breaks and giving your brain a rest. It seems so obvious, it seems like a no-brainer. I remember struggling with this in college where I would just go at it and practice for hours every day, and my teacher was always telling me to take breaks. And to some level, you know, when you're 19 or 20, I think there's an ability to just go for stuff, to be sitting at the kit for hours, to be standing in a marimba for hours. That's what I was doing a lot of in college. And so, you know, when you're younger, I think in a way you can pull that off to a higher degree. But even then, you still have to take breaks. Your brain still has to rest at some point. And I know especially as we get older, this is especially important. And so many students have told me that this works so well for them. I made a lesson a while back, you can go check out, it's in the description, about the Pomodoro technique. The lesson is called, What's the Perfect Amount of Daily Practice Time? And we break down how should we structure the perfect practice session, if there is such a thing. And we talk about the Pomodoro technique, which in a nutshell is where you might practice for 25 minutes and then break for 5. So every 30 minutes you take a 5-minute break, just a step away, give your brain a rest. And then you take a 30-minute break every 90 minutes. So you're essentially structuring, 2-hour blocks. This all comes from our body's natural 90-minute cycles. We have 90-minute sleep cycles, and we even have 90-minute, cycles as we're awake of feeling more productive and our brains needing to rest. And so you'll be hammering against a wall, banging your head against the wall if you go hours and hours without stopping. But if you have a break every 90 minutes and you have, those short breaks every 25, then that can help so much for helping you practice more productively. And so something specific that a lot of my students have told me in applying some form of this, they'll say, I've been working at this and working at this, and it's just my mind's going numb. And so I stepped away from the kit. I went and made some coffee. I went and walked outside, got the mail, came back in, and then I could play it. Or if it wasn't, that dramatic of a result, it was at least, I could play it better. It feels better now. I took a 5-minute break and this feels better. So if you've been hammering your head against a wall with an exercise, with a technique or something, just take breaks in your practicing. Sometimes that's what you need. Sometimes your brain needs time to process. Sometimes stepping away is the most productive thing that you're going to do all week. Stopping, knowing when to stop, and being willing to just step away and then come back to something. Sometimes that's the patient approach that we all need to get better at. One example of this for me personally, in running the Non-Glamorous Drummer, I'm always brainstorming new content ideas. I'm always working on, new solutions to problems. What do I need to build? How do I need to help this group of people? And so I can sit here at my computer and, try to brainstorm stuff, write stuff out. But a lot of times my best ideas come while I'm playing with my kids, while I'm driving, while I'm taking a shower, washing my hands, walking outside, sitting on my front porch swing, stuff like that, the mundane things like cleaning up the kitchen and loading a dishwasher. Sometimes when we're doing things like that, that's when the great ideas come because our brains had time to marinate, process, and suddenly there's the idea. So that can totally happen in your practicing. Also, another side note here, as far as slowing down and giving your brain a rest and learning the drums, a great way to do this, I'll preface by saying this, there's an underemphasis in music education, whether from YouTubers out there educating or universities or one-on-one music instructors. There's an underemphasis on stopping and sitting down and just listening to music for the enjoyment of listening to music. Not many people talk about that. like actually stopping practicing and just sitting down and listening to music. But this is critical. I became a better drummer. There came a point in my playing where I became a better drummer by practicing less and listening to music more. Now, that's not to say you should practice less early on. When you're in those beginner to intermediate stages, you've got to practice. You've got to spend time at your instrument. But you can augment that by listening to music, and that becomes a really great way to take breaks from what you're physically playing. So if you build a practice session around the 3 core pillars of drumming: hand technique, coordination, music, and listening, that means you might spend 30 minutes working on the hands. Great, take a little 5-minute break at the end of that. Then 30 minutes working, or 25 minutes working on coordination. Great, take a little break there. Then spend your next 30 minutes just listening to music, listening to favorite songs, listening, like identifying what the drums are doing. What's the kick pattern there? Why is the vocal doing that? What about that guitar lick? And just listening carefully. And then you'll feel so refreshed in a way after doing that, so newly inspired and motivated, that then you could jump right back into the hand technique and right back into the coordination, and you can have a cycle like that because it's all balanced. The sitting and listening to music is such a great way to break from the physical playing. But that's underemphasized for some reason. I was at a point in my playing where I was becoming a more advanced drummer, where the solution for me wasn't getting faster, it wasn't building more extreme coordination. The solution for me was getting better at playing the music I wanted to play, and sitting down and critically listening to the songs that I wanted to get better at playing, and emulating my favorite drummers and paying attention. How do they approach the song? How do they craft their parts and their fills? That became the more productive strategy for me, and it will for you too. When you get to that intermediate into advanced stage where you're feeling good behind the drums, you can play what you want to play, but there's still a missing element, and that is the music, the listening, the knowing what to play and when to play it. And that's where you have to shift that focus to listening. And that's something you can't rush. It takes time. Sitting and listening to music, you can't hurry that. You can't say, all right, I'm going to listen to George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue in 5 minutes today. Yesterday I listened to it in 19 minutes. Today I'm going to listen to it in 5 minutes. No, you can't do that, especially with these long orchestral works. You have to take the full amount of time. You can't, music happens in real time. You can't rush it. And so that forces you to slow down, which goes along with our brain tip 2 of practicing slowly and our brain tip 1 of repetition. That's why this is all tied together by that statement earlier. When you slow down, you grow faster. But the only way to make sense of that is thinking long-term. You have to have a long-term vision of this. So remember, these are long-term things. We're talking a year down the road, 10 years down the road. Employ these mindsets. Make this your approach, and you will master the drums. You will get your playing on autopilot. You will be playing the ideas in your head, feeling more in command, confident, in control, and comfortable behind your instrument. You can absolutely do it, but you have to be patient. You have to have the long-term vision. So here's what to expect long-term as you adopt these ways of approaching the drums. For one thing, you'll feel more at home and comfortable behind the kit. That's kind of a given. You'll have complete control and command over your instrument. That's what happens with time as you practice this stuff. You'll be able to play the creative ideas you hear in your head. That's what comes with repetition, where you get so comfortable with something, you're able to step out and start adjusting the way you play it. You'll have way more fun because drumming will become easier. So before you go, I've got a really good quote to share with you. You may have heard this before. This is something Bill Gates said. Most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. I think I've definitely been guilty of this. And I know I had a short-term approach to drumming. In high school, I was thinking, how fast can I get this week or this month? How much more, how many more flashy licks can I learn? And these are things that serve us in the short term, but we're underestimating how good of a drummer, how much can we actually master the instrument in the next 5 years? What about thinking long term? What if we could actually sound like our favorite professional drummer 10 years from now? That is very possible. I believe you can go from total beginner to able to play with a band in 12 months. You can definitely do that. But let's think about 10 years. You can go from total beginner to professional drummer in 10 years. Seriously, you can absolutely do that. But you've got to have that long-term vision. People overestimate what they can do in 1 year, and we especially overestimate what we can do in a month, but they underestimate what they can do in 10 years. I want you thinking about that, just food for thought. Question for you as you go. Which of these 3 mindsets have you not been doing? Which can you adopt in order to make more progress in the next 6 to 12 months and beyond? Be thinking about that. Tell me in the comments which of these resonated with you, which you're going to apply to your whole practicing approach. And before you go, be sure to grab that 30-day coordination e-guide. That's going to give you some really great practical stuff to work on to help build your coordination. That's your practical, technical companion to today's lesson. As always, stay non-glamorous. Know that you can do this. I'll see you on the next lesson.